Zephyr's 4 arms trembled as the transport ship descended toward Earth's atmosphere. The veteran Calathi warrior had fought in 17 different star systems, faced down the savage Vorthan Empire, and survived the brutal siege of Nexus Prime. But nothing in his 3 decades of military service had prepared him for this assignment. The briefing had been simple enough. Earth was joining the Galactic Coalition after their recent victory against the Xerian plague that had threatened to consume 3 sectors. The humans had somehow managed to contain and eliminate a biological weapon that had stumped the Coalition's best scientists for months. Now they wanted full membership, and Zephyr was being sent as the military liaison to assess their combat capabilities. Standard procedure, his commanding officer had said. Every new species gets evaluated. The humans claim to be warriors, but they're from a backwater planet with no significant conflicts in their recent history. This should be routine. But as Zephyr's ship broke through the cloud cover and he got his first glimpse of Earth's surface, something felt wrong. The cities below weren't the gleaming spires of crystal and metal he was used to seeing on civilized worlds. Instead, they were sprawling masses of concrete and steel with strange geometric patterns that seemed almost defensive. The landing pad was surrounded by humans in what they called military uniforms. Zephyr studied them through the viewport as his ship touched down. They were smaller than he'd expected, averaging only 6 feet in height compared to his own 8-foot frame. Their bodies looked soft, with no visible armor plating or natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no chitinous shells. Just pale pink skin and those strange binocular eyes set in the front of their heads like predators. General Sarah Mitchell was waiting for him at the bottom of the ramp. She was even smaller than the others, barely reaching his chest, with graying hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of age and experience. When she extended her hand in what his briefing materials had called a handshake, Zephyr was surprised by the firm grip. "Welcome to Earth, General Zephyr," she said in perfectly pronounced galactic standard. "We're honored to have you here." "The honor is mine," Zephyr replied, though privately he wondered how these fragile-looking beings had managed to survive long enough to develop space travel. "I'm looking forward to observing your military capabilities." General Mitchell's lips curved upward in what humans called a smile, but something in her eyes made Zephyr's combat instincts twitch. "Oh, I think you'll find us quite interesting. We've prepared a series of demonstrations, but first, would you like a tour of our facilities?" As they walked through the military base, Zephyr noticed details that didn't match his expectations. The buildings were built low and thick, designed to withstand bombardment. The corridors had multiple exit points and strategic choke points. Even this seemingly casual placement of equipment could quickly be converted into defensive positions. This wasn't the infrastructure of a peaceful species. "Your architecture is quite robust," Zephyr observed, running one of his hands along a reinforced wall. "We've learned that it pays to be prepared," Mitchell replied casually. "Earth has taught us that survival isn't guaranteed." They entered a briefing room where several other humans were waiting. Zephyr was introduced to Colonel James Park, a stocky man with scars across his knuckles, and Lieutenant Commander Ana Santos, whose dark eyes seemed to catalog every detail about him within seconds. There was also Dr. Elena Volkov, a civilian scientist whose presence puzzled him. "Dr. Volkov will be explaining some of our recent innovations," Mitchell said, settling into a chair that creaked under even her light weight. "We thought you might be interested in our approach to the Xerian plague." Zephyr's mandibles clicked with curiosity. "Yes, the Coalition is quite impressed that you managed to solve in months what our scientists couldn't in years." Dr. Volkov leaned forward, her pale eyes gleaming with an intensity that made Zephyr uncomfortable. "The Coalition scientists were trying to cure the plague," she said softly. "We took a different approach." "Different how?" "We didn't try to save the Xerions," Colonel Park said bluntly. "We killed them. All of them." Zephyr's 4 eyes widened in shock. "But the plague was a biological weapon created by the Xerions themselves. It was supposed to target Coalition species while leaving them immune." "Supposed to," Dr. Volkov agreed. "But biological weapons have a nasty habit of mutation. We realized the plague would eventually adapt to affect its creators, so we helped it along." The casual way she discussed genocide made Zephyr's stomach churn. "You accelerated the plague's mutation?" We didn't just accelerate it, she continued, pulling up holographic displays that showed viral structures. We weaponized it, turned their own biological weapon against them. Within 6 months, the entire Xerian species was extinct. The plague died with them, Lieutenant Commander Santos added. No more hosts, no more transmission. Problem solved. Zephyr stared at the humans around the table. They were discussing the complete elimination of an entire species as if they were talking about exterminating garden pests. His military training had prepared him for violence, for the necessity of killing in combat. But this was something else entirely. How many Xerions were there? He asked quietly. Approximately 4 billion across 12 worlds, General Mitchell replied without emotion. Their entire civilization. And you feel no remorse. The humans exchanged glances. Colonel Park shrugged. They created a weapon designed to commit genocide against multiple coalition species. We stopped them the only way we could. But surely there were alternatives. The coalition could have negotiated or found a way to contain them. Dr. Volkov's laugh was sharp and humorless. General Zephyr, may I ask you something? In your military experience, when facing an enemy that has demonstrated both the capability and intent to commit genocide, what is the appropriate response? Zephyr's training kicked in automatically. Neutralize the threat by any means necessary. Exactly. The Xerions weren't interested in negotiation. They'd already deployed their weapon against 3 coalition worlds before we intervened. They were committed to genocide. We simply ensured they couldn't complete it. The logic was sound from a military perspective, but something about it still disturbed Zephyr. Perhaps it was the complete lack of emotion in their voices, the way they discussed mass extinction as a tactical decision. I understand your methods were effective, he said carefully. But the coalition has certain ethical standards regarding the treatment of enemy populations. General Mitchell leaned back in her chair. General Zephyr, would you like to know why Earth has no major conflicts in our recent history? I would. Because we're very good at ending them permanently. The words hung in the air like a threat. Zephyr found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about these humans. They looked soft, fragile, weak. But there was something in their eyes, something cold and calculating that reminded him of the apex predators from his homeworld. Perhaps, he said slowly, you could show me some of your standard military training? Of course. Mitchell smiled that unsettling smile again. Colonel Park, why don't you take General Zephyr to observe the morning exercises? As they left the briefing room, Zephyr caught a glimpse of Dr. Volkov's computer screen. It showed genetic sequences labeled with species names he recognized, coalition member races. When she noticed his gaze, she quickly minimized the display, but not before he saw his own species name among the files. The walk to the training grounds gave Zephyr time to process what he'd learned. The humans had committed genocide and spoke about it as casually as discussing the weather. They'd solved a plague crisis not through medicine or diplomacy, but through the complete extinction of an entire species. And now they were cataloging the genetic information of coalition races. What exactly had the coalition invited to join them? The training grounds were expansive, with multiple obstacle courses and combat simulation areas. About 50 human soldiers were engaged in various exercises, their movements coordinated and efficient despite their apparent physical limitations. This is our basic infantry training, Colonel Park explained. Nothing too advanced. Zephyr watched as the humans navigated obstacle courses with surprising speed and agility. Their small size actually seemed to be an advantage, allowing them to move through spaces that would have been impossible for larger species. But what struck him most was their persistence. When they failed an obstacle, they didn't rest or seek assistance. They immediately attempted it again and again until they succeeded. How long do they train before being considered combat ready? Zephyr asked. Basic training is 3 months, but that's just the beginning. Most of our soldiers train continuously throughout their careers. 3 months. Zephyr was incredulous. Calathi warriors trained for 2 full years before being considered ready for combat. That seems insufficient for proper preparation. Park's expression grew serious. General, may I ask how your species typically conducts warfare? We rely on superior technology, tactical coordination, and individual combat prowess. Our warriors are trained in 17 different weapon systems, and 12 forms of close combat. And how do you handle casualties? The question seemed odd. We minimize them through superior planning and equipment. But when soldiers are wounded or killed, they are evacuated for medical treatment or honored for their sacrifice. Park nodded slowly. We have a different philosophy. Would you like to see a demonstration? Before Zephyr could respond, Park shouted an order in English. Immediately, all the soldiers in the training area formed ranks. Park spoke to them briefly in their native language, then gestured to Zephyr. I've told them you're here to assess our combat readiness. Park translated. They're going to show you our standard close combat training. 2 soldiers stepped forward, a man and woman who looked impossibly young and small. The man couldn't have weighed more than 180 pounds, while the woman was even smaller. They faced each other in a fighting stance that Zephyr didn't recognize. What happened next defied everything Zephyr thought he knew about human fragility. The 2 soldiers began fighting with a brutality that shocked him. They used every part of their bodies as weapons: hands, elbows, knees, feet. When the woman was knocked down, she didn't yield. Instead, she grabbed her opponent's leg and used her own body weight to bring him crashing down beside her. They continued fighting on the ground, each attempting to disable the other through joint manipulation and pressure points. The male soldier managed to get behind the woman and applied what looked like a chokehold. In any other species, this would signal surrender. But the woman didn't tap out or signal defeat. Instead, she drove her elbow into his ribs repeatedly until his grip loosened, then twisted free and reversed their positions. Stop, Zephyr called out, alarmed. They're going to seriously injure each other. Park looked surprised. Sir, this is just standard sparring. They're barely getting warmed up. Barely getting. Zephyr stared as the 2 humans continued their violent dance. Blood was flowing from the man's nose, and the woman had a rapidly swelling bruise around her left eye. But neither showed any sign of wanting to quit. If anything, the injuries seemed to make them fight harder. The match finally ended when the woman managed to apply a joint lock that forced the man to signal submission. Both soldiers immediately helped each other to their feet, checked each other's injuries, and returned to their formation with what Zephyr could only describe as satisfaction. That, Park said calmly, was a light training exercise. Light. Zephyr's voice came out higher than intended. They were trying to kill each other. No, sir, if they were trying to kill each other, it would have been over much faster and with less finesse. The casual way Park discussed lethal combat made Zephyr's skin crawl. Among the Caliphate, training was conducted with carefully controlled intensity to prevent injury. These humans were treating serious bodily harm as a routine part of exercise. How often do soldiers get injured during training? He asked. Injured how? Bruises and minor cuts are daily occurrences. Broken bones, maybe once or twice a month per company. Serious injuries requiring hospitalization are fairly rare, maybe a few per year. And you consider this acceptable? Park's expression grew confused. Sir, how else would they learn to fight through pain? Combat is ugly and unpredictable. If our soldiers can't handle getting hurt in training, how can we expect them to function when people are actually trying to kill them? The logic was sound, but it revealed something about human nature that Zephyr found deeply disturbing. They weren't just willing to inflict death on their enemies. They were willing to inflict pain on themselves and each other as a matter of routine. As they continued the tour, Zephyr observed more training exercises. Humans practicing with weapons, running long distances while carrying heavy equipment, and engaging in group combat scenarios that involved levels of violence he'd previously associated only with actual warfare. But it wasn't just the physical brutality that unsettled him. It was the psychological aspect. These humans weren't fighting because they were angry or afraid. They were calm, methodical, almost clinical in their approach to violence. They studied their opponents, adapted their tactics, and pressed their advantages with a cold efficiency that reminded him of hunting predators. Colonel, Zephyr said as they watched a squad practice urban warfare tactics. May I ask you something personal? Of course, sir. Have you ever killed anyone? Park was quiet for a long moment. Yes, sir. Multiple times. How did it make you feel? Another pause. Satisfied that I completed my mission and survived to return to my unit. No guilt? No remorse? Park turned to look at him directly. General, with respect, should I feel guilty for stopping someone who is trying to kill me and my soldiers? I suppose not. But, sir, killing isn't something we enjoy. But it's something we're good at when it becomes necessary. The fact that we don't take pleasure in it doesn't mean we hesitate when the situation requires it. As the day wore on, Zephyr began to understand why Earth had no major conflicts in recent history. These humans didn't avoid war because they were peaceful. They avoided war because when they went to war, they ended it completely. The Zerions had learned that lesson too late. When evening came, General Mitchell invited him to dinner at the officers' club. The meal was pleasant enough. Humans were surprisingly good cooks, and their conversation covered a wide range of topics from art to philosophy. But throughout the evening, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that he was dining with apex predators who were politely restraining themselves. General Mitchell, he said as they finished their meal, I have to ask, your species shows remarkable capability for violence, yet you seem to function as a peaceful society. How do you reconcile these two aspects? Mitchell considered the question while sipping from her glass of wine. We learned long ago that the best way to avoid violence is to be better at it than anyone else. When potential enemies know that attacking us will result in their complete destruction, they tend to choose diplomacy instead. But doesn't maintaining such capabilities require a certain mindset that would make peaceful coexistence difficult? Not really. We've learned to channel our competitive and aggressive instincts into productive pursuits. Sports, business, scientific research, exploration. The same drives that make us effective warriors also make us effective at building civilizations. And if someone threatens those civilizations? Mitchell's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then, we remind them why humanity climbed to the top of Earth's food chain and stayed there. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Zephyr composed his first report to Coalition Command. But, as he tried to summarize what he'd learned about human military capabilities, he found himself struggling with how to convey the true nature of what he'd observed. How do you explain to a galactic civilization that valued honor, dignity, and restraint that they'd just invited a species of apex predators to join their ranks? How do you describe beings who could commit genocide and call it problem-solving, who practiced violence as casually as others practiced music, and who viewed the complete destruction of their enemies as a reasonable first option rather than a last resort? The humans weren't evil. They were polite, intelligent, even charming in many ways. But they were also the most naturally dangerous species he'd ever encountered. They'd spent their evolutionary history as persistence hunters, tracking prey across vast distances until exhaustion made the kill inevitable. Now they were bringing those same instincts to galactic politics. Zephyr deleted his first 3 attempts at the report and started again. Tomorrow, he would see more of their capabilities. Tonight, he needed to understand what he was really dealing with. Outside his window, the Earth continued its ancient rotation, carrying billions of these deceptively fragile apex predators through the cosmos. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Galactic Coalition waited for his assessment, unaware that they'd just invited the most efficient killing machines in known space to join their peaceful alliance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Coalition had spent millennia building a civilization based on cooperation, diplomacy, and mutual respect. Now they were about to learn what happened when you introduced natural-born killers to a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight. Zephyr had a feeling the galaxy was about to become a very different place. Zephyr's second day on Earth began with an alarm that sent ice through his veins. The shrill wailing that echoed across the military base was unmistakably a combat alert, and within seconds, he could hear the thundering of boots as hundreds of humans responded to the call. His translator device crackled to life as General Mitchell's voice filled the base. This is not a drill. We have confirmed hostile contact in the Kepler system. All personnel to battle stations. Deployment in 30 minutes. Zephyr rushed from his quarters to find the base transformed. The casual, almost relaxed atmosphere of the previous day had been replaced by a machine-like efficiency that made his scales crawl. Humans moved with purpose and speed, their conversations reduced to crisp, essential communications. Equipment that had been stored away materialized, as if from nowhere. He found General Mitchell in the command center, standing before a massive holographic display showing star charts and tactical data. Her transformation was the most striking of all. Gone was the polite, diplomatic officer who had welcomed him. In her place stood something that reminded him of the war forms his own people took in extreme combat situations. "General," she said without looking away from the display, "perfect timing. You're about to see humanity's true military doctrine in action. What's the situation?" "Pirate fleet. 47 ships, mixed classes. They've attacked and destroyed a coalition transport convoy in the Kepler system. Estimated 3,000 civilians dead, including families." Zephyr's mandibles clicked as he processed the information. A tragedy, certainly, but hardly requiring this level of response. The coalition has standard protocols for dealing with piracy. Economic sanctions, patrol increases, negotiated surrenders. Mitchell finally turned to look at him, and Zephyr took an involuntary step backward. Her eyes held the same cold calculation he'd seen in the training yard, but magnified 100-fold. "General Zephyr," she said quietly, 3,000 innocent people are dead. That includes children. The pirates broadcast their attack, made it into entertainment. They're not interested in negotiation. Even so, 47 ships represents a significant force. Surely the appropriate response would be to assemble a coalition fleet, plan a coordinated assault. "The appropriate response," Colonel Park interjected as he approached carrying tactical gear, "is to ensure this never happens again. Ever." Before Zephyr could ask what that meant, Mitchell was issuing orders with rapid-fire precision. "Colonel Park, take the 3rd Fleet and jump to Kepler 7. Establish a perimeter and wait for my signal. Commander Santos, I want tracking data on every ship that fled the system. Dr. Volkov, prep the Hellhound packages." "Hellhounds?" Zephyr asked. Dr. Volkov looked up from her workstation with that unsettling smile. "A new development we've been working on. I think you'll find them interesting." Within 20 minutes, Zephyr found himself aboard a human warship called the Retribution. The name should have been his first clue about what was to come. The ship itself was unlike anything in his experience. Where coalition vessels were designed for multiple roles, exploration, diplomacy, trade, and defense, the Retribution had clearly been built for one purpose: killing. Every surface was reinforced. Every corridor had emergency blast doors. The weapons systems were integrated into the ship's structure rather than mounted externally, making them nearly impossible to disable without destroying the vessel entirely. But what struck him most was the crew. They moved through the ship with the same deadly efficiency he'd observed on the base, but now he could see the true purpose behind their training. "Captain Williams," Mitchell said to the ship's commander, "set course for Kepler 7. Maximum burn." "Aye, ma'am." ETA 17 hours at maximum acceleration. 17 hours. Zephyr's own people would have taken days to assemble a response fleet, conduct planning sessions, attempt diplomatic contact, and, finally, authorize military action. The humans had mobilized and launched in under an hour. As they traveled through hyperspace, Zephyr was given access to the tactical briefings. What he learned made him question everything he thought he understood about warfare. The pirate fleet wasn't just a random criminal organization. Intelligence reports showed they'd been operating for over 3 years, hitting civilian targets across 5 different systems. They specialized in attacks designed for maximum psychological impact, torturing victims, broadcasting their crimes, leaving survivors to spread terror. The coalition's response had been to increase patrol schedules and issue warnings to civilian traffic. "How many people have they killed?" Zephyr asked as he reviewed the files. "Best estimate is around 15,000 over the past 3 years, Commander Santos replied. "Plus unknown numbers of people who've starved or died from disease after they destroyed supply convoys." And the coalition's response. They've issued 17 strongly worded diplomatic protests and increased the reward for information, leading to the pirates' capture from 50,000 to 75,000 credits. Zephyr felt a sick sensation in his stomach. "That's inadequate." "Yes," Santos said simply. "It is." As they approached the Kepler system, Zephyr was invited to observe from the bridge. The pirate fleet had made no attempt to flee after their attack. They were apparently confident that the coalition's response would be as ineffective as always. Sensors show 46 ships in formation around Kepler 7, the tactical officer reported. One ship appears to have left the system. Track it, Mitchell ordered. I want to know where it goes. All ships, battle positions. Begin Operation Clean Sweep. Zephyr watched the tactical display as the human fleet moved into position. They had brought only 12 ships against the pirates' 46, but their formation was unlike anything he'd seen before. Instead of the traditional line-of-battle approach favored by coalition forces, the humans spread out in a complex three-dimensional web that seemed to surround the entire system. This seems tactically unsound, Zephyr observed. You're outnumbered nearly 4-1, and you've divided your forces. Watch, was all Mitchell said. The first shot came from the pirates. A massive energy beam that would have crippled any coalition vessel struck the lead human ship. Zephyr expected to see the explosion that would mark the beginning of a running battle. Instead, the ship's shields absorbed the impact completely and returned fire with a weapon that seemed to tear reality itself. The pirate vessel simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not disabled, gone. As if it had never been there at all. What was that? Zephyr gasped. Molecular disintegration beam, Dr. Volkov explained calmly. We learned some interesting things from studying Xerian biotechnology before we eliminated them. The battle that followed wasn't really a battle at all. It was an extermination. The human ships moved with inhuman coordination, their weapons systems operating with lethal precision. Every shot found its target. Every target was completely destroyed. When the pirates attempted to flee, they found their escape routes blocked by ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. But what truly horrified Zephyr was the systematic nature of the destruction. The humans weren't fighting desperately or reacting to threats. They were executing a plan with mechanical precision. Ship after ship simply vanished under their fire. The few attempts at surrender were ignored. They're trying to surrender, Zephyr said urgently. Coalition law requires. Coalition law, Mitchell interrupted, doesn't apply to mass murderers. In less than 30 minutes, 46 pirate vessels and their crews had been completely annihilated. Not a single human ship showed significant damage. The system that had been the site of the worst pirate attack in coalition history was now completely clear of hostile forces. Operation Clean Sweep complete, Captain Williams reported. All targets eliminated. 0 survivors. Excellent. Now comes the interesting part. Dr. Volkov, release the Hellhounds. Hellhounds? Zephyr asked again. Remote tracking drones, Volkov explained, her fingers dancing over her control console. They follow hyperspace traces. We're going to track down every ship that's had contact with this pirate fleet over the past year. Zephyr watched in growing horror as dozens of small craft launched from the human ships and disappeared into hyperspace. You're going to hunt down anyone who's ever had contact with these pirates? Everyone who helped them. Everyone who supplied them. Everyone who provided them with information about convoy routes. Everyone who bought stolen goods from them. Everyone who knew what they were doing and did nothing to stop it. That could be thousands of people across dozens of worlds. Yes, Mitchell said calmly. It could be. Over the next several hours, Zephyr learned the true scope of human determination. The Hellhound drones transmitted their data back in real time, tracing hyperspace signatures to bases, suppliers, fences, informants, and corrupt officials who had enabled the pirates' operations. Each target was cataloged, analyzed, and marked for elimination. This is genocide, Zephyr said quietly. You're talking about killing thousands of sentient beings. No, Dr. Volkov corrected. Genocide is the systematic elimination of an entire species or ethnic group. This is justice. We're eliminating a criminal network. The coalition will never accept this. They'll view it as an act of aggression against multiple member worlds. Mitchell turned to face him fully. General Zephyr, let me ask you something. How many coalition citizens have died from piracy in the past decade? Zephyr accessed his data files. Approximately 50,000. And how many pirates have been killed or captured by coalition forces in the same period? The number made him sick. Less than 100. So the coalition's approach has resulted in 50,000 dead civilians and the capture of less than 1% of their killers. Does that strike you as effective? It strikes me as civilized. We don't sink to the level of criminals. And that, Colonel Park said from behind him, is why your people keep dying. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communications station. Admiral Mitchell, we're receiving a transmission from Coalition High Command. Priority Alpha. Put it through. The holographic display flickered and resolved into the image of Admiral Venix, the Coalition's supreme military commander. The elderly Drakmary's scales were flushed with agitation. General Mitchell, we've received reports that human ships have engaged in unauthorized military action in the Kepler system. You will cease all operations immediately and report to Coalition headquarters for debriefing. Mitchell's expression didn't change. Admiral Venix, we have eliminated the pirate threat in the Kepler system as requested by the families of the 3,000 civilians who were murdered yesterday. You were not authorized to take military action. The Coalition has procedures for dealing with criminal activities. The Coalition's procedures have resulted in 15,000 dead civilians over the past 3 years while the responsible parties operated with impunity. We found this unacceptable. Unacceptable. Phoenix's voice rose to a shriek. You've destroyed 46 ships. That's more firepower than most planets possess. And now we're receiving reports that you're targeting civilian installations across multiple systems. We're targeting criminal support networks. Every target has been verified as actively complicit in the murder of Coalition citizens. You don't have the authority to make that determination. You're not the law. Mitchell's smile returned, but it was colder than the void between stars. Admiral, with respect, the law failed. 15,000 civilians are dead because your procedures prioritize the rights of criminals over the safety of innocent people. We've corrected that imbalance. If you continue this action, the Coalition will have no choice but to treat it as an act of war. That, Mitchell said quietly, would be unfortunate. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Zephyr stared at the humans around him, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. They had just threatened the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy, without a trace of fear or uncertainty. You realize, he said slowly, that the Coalition could mobilize thousands of ships against you. They could try, Santos acknowledged. It wouldn't end well for anyone involved. How can you be so confident? Humanity has, 50 ships? 100? The Coalition has entire fleets. Dr. Volkov laughed, the sound like breaking glass. General Zephyr, may I show you something? She activated a new display that showed Earth's solar system. Zephyr had seen it during his approach, but now he was seeing details that had been hidden before. What he'd taken for asteroid belts and space stations were revealed to be something far more sinister. Earth has been preparing for galactic contact for over a century, Volkov explained. We've spent that time building defensive systems and military assets. What you're seeing are automated defense platforms, shipyards, weapons testing facilities, and manufacturing complexes. The scale was staggering. Thousands of installations throughout the system, all designed for one purpose: war on an interstellar scale. We've been watching the galaxy for a long time, Mitchell added, studying your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses. We learned everything we could about every major species in the Coalition before we made contact. You've been spying on us? We've been preparing. There's a difference. As if to prove her point, alerts began coming in from across human space. The Hellhound drones had found their targets, and human strike teams were already moving to eliminate them. Pirate supply bases, corrupt officials, black market dealers, information brokers, anyone who had contributed to the criminal network was being systematically hunted down and eliminated. This is madness, Zephyr said. You're starting a war with half the galaxy. No, Mitchell corrected. We're ending one. The Coalition has been fighting a losing war against organized crime for decades. They've just been doing it slowly, inefficiently, and with an acceptable casualty rate for innocent civilians. We've decided that rate is no longer acceptable. And if the Coalition tries to stop you? Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. That would be their choice. We've extended our hand in friendship and offered to share our capabilities in service of peace and justice. If they prefer to side with criminals and murderers over their own citizens, that tells us everything we need to know about their values. You're forcing them to choose sides. No, General. We're showing them what effective law enforcement looks like. The choice of how to respond is entirely theirs. As the hours passed, reports continued to come in. The human operation was proceeding with terrifying efficiency. Every target was eliminated without warning or mercy. Entire criminal organizations that had operated for decades were being wiped out in a matter of hours. And, throughout it all, the humans remained calm, professional, and completely committed to their course of action. Zephyr found himself thinking about his briefing materials again. The humans claimed to be from a peaceful world with no recent major conflicts. Now he understood why. They didn't have conflicts because they ended them so completely that no one dared to start new ones. How many? He asked as the operation wound down. How many what? Santos replied. How many did you kill today? She checked her display. Including the pirate crews, approximately 8,000 confirmed eliminations across 43 systems. 8,000 lives ended in a single day. The scope was breathtaking. The efficiency was terrifying. But what disturbed Zephyr most was the complete lack of doubt or regret among the humans. They had just conducted the largest military operation in Coalition history, and they were treating it as routine pest control. Do you feel anything about what you've done? He asked Mitchell as they prepared for the return journey to Earth. I feel satisfied that justice has been served, she replied. I feel proud of my people for their professionalism and efficiency. I feel confident that piracy in Coalition space will be significantly reduced for the foreseeable future. And the 8,000 people who died. They made their choice when they decided to prey on innocent civilians. We simply ensured they couldn't continue making that choice. As the Retribution jumped back toward Earth, Zephyr composed his second report to Coalition Command. But how do you explain that humanity had just redefined the concept of law enforcement? How do you convey that they had solved in one day a problem that had plagued the galaxy for decades? And how do you warn a peaceful civilization that they had just invited the galaxy's most effective killers to join their alliance? And that those killers viewed the Coalition's current approach to justice as inadequately protective of innocent life? The humans weren't monsters. They were methodical, intelligent, and seemingly guided by a genuine desire to protect civilian populations. But their definition of protection involved the complete elimination of threats with a thoroughness that bordered on the supernatural. Zephyr had served in 17 conflicts across 3 decades of military service. He had seen the controlled brutality of modern warfare, the careful calculations of acceptable losses, the measured responses designed to achieve political objectives without excessive escalation. This was something else entirely. This was warfare as natural law, as inevitable as gravity. Cross certain lines, threaten the wrong people, and humans would hunt you down with the patient persistence of apex predators tracking wounded prey across vast distances until exhaustion made the kill inevitable. The galaxy had no idea what it was dealing with. And tomorrow, Zephyr would see what other surprises humanity had prepared for their new galactic neighbors. The third day of Zephyr's assignment began with an emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council. He watched the proceedings from General Mitchell's office, observing as representatives from 43 different worlds demanded explanations for what they were calling the human incident. Admiral the Nix stood at the center of the great circular chamber, his scales shifting through rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation. In a single day, humanity has conducted unauthorized military operations across 43 coalition systems, resulting in over 8,000 deaths. This represents the largest single military action in coalition history, undertaken without consultation, authorization, or oversight. The council chamber erupted in translated voices of outrage, fear, and confusion. Representative Corvash of the Mindarian Trade Confederation slammed his 3-fingered hand against his speaking podium. The humans destroyed 5 of our licensed trading stations. They claimed these facilities were involved in criminal activity, but they provided no evidence, no trial, no opportunity for defense. Because, General Mitchell said calmly, activating her communications array, your licensed trading stations were fences for stolen goods. We have detailed transaction records showing they purchased cargo from the pirate fleet immediately after each attack. The chamber fell silent. Corvash's skin flushed purple with embarrassment and rage. Even if that were true, you had no authority to take unilateral action. We had moral authority, Mitchell replied, which apparently counts for more than legal authority when it comes to actually protecting innocent lives. Zephyr watched as chaos erupted again. The humans had just accused the coalition of valuing legal procedures over justice, and they had the evidence to back up their claims. Worse, they were making the accusation from a position of demonstrated military superiority that made the threat implicit in their words impossible to ignore. The question before us, came the calm voice of Elder Vine from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance, is how to respond to this unprecedented action. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections, but they have also shown a willingness to act unilaterally in ways that threaten the foundation of our legal system. With respect, Elder Vine, Mitchell said, your legal system has failed. Utterly and completely. We've provided the Council with detailed intelligence on criminal networks that have operated openly for years. Networks that your investigations somehow never managed to uncover despite the fact that we mapped them completely in less than 6 months. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Zephyr could see Council members exchanging glances, accessing data files, and slowly coming to the same horrible realization he had. The humans were right. Dr. Volkov's voice joined the transmission, crisp and clinical. We've compiled a comprehensive analysis of coalition law enforcement effectiveness over the past decade. Would the Council like to review it? That won't be necessary, Admiral the Nix said quickly. I think it will, Elder Vine replied, overriding him. Display your analysis. The holographic projector in the Council chamber activated, showing charts and graphs that painted a devastating picture of coalition law enforcement. Crime rates rising steadily. Conviction rates falling. Repeat offenders operating with virtual impunity. Civilian casualties from criminal activity climbing year after year, while the resources devoted to stopping them remain static. Your system, Dr. Volkov explained with academic detachment, prioritizes the rights of the accused over the safety of potential victims. This creates an environment where criminal activity becomes increasingly profitable and safe. Our approach prioritizes the protection of innocent life over the comfort of those who choose to prey upon it. Your approach, snarled Representative Torvik from the warrior clans, is simple murder. No. Colonel Park's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Murder is what happened to those 3,000 civilians in the convoy. What we did was justice. Justice requires trials. Evidence. Due process. We provided evidence, Santos interjected. Complete transaction records, communication intercepts, testimony from captured associates, financial data showing exactly how much money each target made from criminal activities. More evidence than your courts have required for convictions in the past decade. But you didn't use our courts. Because your courts don't work. The simple, blunt statement silenced the chamber. Zephyr realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in coalition history. A member species was directly challenging not just coalition policy, but the fundamental philosophy underlying their entire legal and social system. What do you want? Elder Vine asked finally. What are humanity's demands? Mitchell's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. We don't have demands, Elder Vine. We have an offer. An offer. We're offering to share our law enforcement capabilities with the coalition. Our intelligence gathering methods, our investigation techniques, our response protocols. We can reduce crime in coalition space by 90% within 2 years. The promise was staggering. Crime had been a growing problem for the coalition for over a century. If the humans could deliver on their claim. And what do you want in return? The Nix asked suspiciously. Authority to act, Mitchell replied simply. When we identify criminal networks, we want authorization to eliminate them completely. No endless trials, no plea bargains, no early releases for good behavior. Just swift, final justice. You're asking for the authority to execute anyone you deem guilty of criminal activity. We're asking for the authority to protect innocent life from predators. If those predators choose to resist rather than surrender, the consequences are on them. Elder Vine's translated voice carried a note of desperation. But surely there must be some middle ground. Some way to reform our existing systems rather than replace them entirely. Your existing systems, Dr. Volkov said, are based on the assumption that all sentient life has inherent value and that even criminals deserve compassion and the opportunity for redemption. It's a beautiful philosophy. But Some creatures are predators by choice rather than necessity. They cannot be reformed, only contained or eliminated. Your philosophy doesn't account for that reality. And you do? We are that reality, Mitchell said quietly. Humanity didn't evolve to be the most dangerous species on Earth by giving predators second chances. The transmission paused as the council went into closed session to debate humanity's offer. Zephyr found himself alone with the human command staff, trying to process everything he'd witnessed. "You're asking them to fundamentally change who they are," he said finally. "No," Mitchell replied. "We're asking them to acknowledge what the galaxy actually is." The coalition was founded on idealistic principles by species that never had to evolve as persistence hunters. They've never faced existential threats that could only be resolved through complete elimination of the threat. And you have. Every day for millions of years. Earth isn't a kind world, General. It's beautiful, but it's not kind. Everything that lives there earned its place through competition, adaptation, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. Dr. Volkov pulled up another display, this one showing Earth's evolutionary history. Humanity's ancestors survived ice ages, volcanic winters, pandemic diseases, and countless other existential challenges. Each time, the survivors were those who could adapt quickly and respond with overwhelming force when necessary. The galaxy has been peaceful for centuries, Santos added. Species like yours have had time to develop complex social systems based on cooperation and mutual benefit. That's wonderful, but it's also made you soft. Soft, unprepared for true threats. When the Zerions deployed their plague, the coalition response was to form committees, conduct studies, and attempt diplomatic solutions. By the time you decided on a course of action, millions were already dead. But you solved the problem in months. Because we recognized immediately that the Zerions were an existential threat that could only be resolved through their complete elimination. No committees, no studies, no diplomatic solutions. Just swift, decisive action. The communication system crackled back to life as the council session resumed. Elder Vian's voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The council has reviewed humanity's offer and reached a preliminary decision. "We're listening," Mitchell replied. "We cannot grant you the unrestricted authority you've requested. Our legal and ethical systems simply cannot accommodate such measures." "I see. However, we are prepared to establish a joint task force for dealing with what we will classify as existential threats to civilian populations. This task force would have expanded authority to act swiftly when traditional legal processes would result in unacceptable civilian casualties." Zephyr could see Mitchell considering the proposal. It wasn't everything the humans wanted, but it was a significant step in their direction. "What would classify as an existential threat?" she asked. "Organized criminal activities that have resulted in more than 1,000 civilian deaths over a 12-month period, or any group that explicitly threatens to commit genocide or mass destruction. And our authority within those parameters? Complete operational freedom, with the understanding that your methods will be subject to post-action review." "By whom?" "By humanity's peer species within the coalition." "We don't have peer species," Santos interjected. "That's what you're not understanding. We're not just another coalition member with slightly different customs. We're apex predators who evolved on a death world." The chamber fell silent again. Finally, Elder Vine spoke. "Then, perhaps it's time for the coalition to learn from apex predators. You're accepting our proposal?" "We're accepting a modified version of it. Humanity will be given operational authority over existential threats as defined by the parameters we've discussed. In return, you will share your intelligence gathering and law enforcement capabilities with other coalition species." "Agreed," Mitchell said without hesitation. "When do we start?" "Immediately. We've identified 17 current situations that meet the established criteria." Mitchell's smile was predatory. "Send us the files." As the transmission ended, Zephyr felt a profound shift in his understanding of galactic politics. The coalition had just officially acknowledged that their philosophical approach to justice was inadequate for dealing with genuine threats. They had handed operational authority to a species that viewed complete elimination of enemies as a routine first option. "You realize what you've just accomplished?" he asked. "We've established a framework for effective law enforcement," Mitchell replied. "Nothing more. You've changed the fundamental nature of coalition governance. You've legitimized the use of overwhelming force as a first response to criminal activity. We've legitimized the protection of innocent life over the theoretical rights of predators who prey on them. Park corrected. There's a difference. Over the following hours, Zephyr observed as humanity began implementing their new authority. The 17 situations identified by the coalition ranged from slavery rings to weapons smuggling to organized piracy similar to what they'd eliminated in the Kepler system. Each case was analyzed, investigated, and resolved with the same methodical efficiency he'd witnessed before. But what struck him most was the reaction from civilian populations in affected areas. Where coalition law enforcement had been viewed with frustration and skepticism, humanity's interventions were greeted with relief and gratitude. Civilians who had lived in fear of criminal organizations for years suddenly found themselves protected by guardians who didn't negotiate with predators. The Corvani trade station situation has been resolved, Dr. Volkov reported. The slavery operation was processing approximately 200 victims per month. All victims have been freed, all perpetrators eliminated, all physical assets destroyed. Casualties? Mitchell asked. 0 civilian, 0 human. Approximately 300 criminals. Next case. It continued like that throughout the day. Case after case of criminal organizations that had operated with virtual impunity under coalition law being systematically eliminated by human forces. No trials, no appeals, no plea bargains. Just swift, final justice administered with surgical precision. How do you maintain such accuracy? Zephyr asked. How do you ensure you're not eliminating innocent people? Multiple verification protocols, Dr. Volkov explained. Financial records, communication intercepts, victim testimony, physical evidence. We don't act until we're certain of guilt. But what if you're wrong? Then, innocent people die because we failed to act, or innocent people die because we acted incorrectly. The difference is that inaction guarantees continued victimization, while action might result in isolated mistakes. We choose the option that protects the maximum number of innocent lives. That's a very utilitarian approach. It's a very practical approach. Philosophical purity is a luxury that civilization can only afford when it's not under threat. As the day wound down, Zephyr found himself reviewing casualty reports. In 18 hours, humanity had eliminated 7 major criminal organizations, freed over 2,000 victims from various forms of exploitation, and seized enough illegal weapons to arm a small fleet. The cost had been approximately 4,000 criminal lives and 0 civilian casualties. Tomorrow, Mitchell said as she prepared to leave the command center, we'll begin phase 2 of our integration with coalition law enforcement. We're going to start training other species in our methods. You think they can learn? Some of them. The warrior species like yours have the basic instincts. They just need to unlearn the constraints that coalition philosophy has placed on them. And the others? The peaceful species will never be warriors. But they can learn to support those who are. That night, Zephyr sat in his quarters composing his 3rd report to Coalition Command. But, as he tried to summarize the day's events, he realized he wasn't just documenting humanity's capabilities anymore. He was watching the birth of a new kind of galactic civilization. The coalition had been built on the idea that all species could coexist peacefully through diplomacy, compromise, and mutual respect. It was a noble vision, and it had worked reasonably well for centuries. But it had also created a security environment where predators could thrive and innocent beings suffered while their protectors debated legal procedures. Humanity was offering an alternative, a civilization where justice was swift, final, and completely effective, where criminals faced not years of legal proceedings, but immediate and permanent consequences for their actions, where potential victims were protected by guardians who didn't hesitate to eliminate threats. It wasn't perfect. It certainly wasn't gentle. But it worked with the efficiency that the coalition's current systems couldn't match. As he finished his report, Zephyr realized that his role as evaluator had fundamentally changed. He wasn't assessing whether humanity was suitable for coalition membership anymore. He was documenting the transformation of the coalition itself under humanity's influence. The galaxy was about to become a much safer place for law-abiding civilians. It was also about to become far more dangerous for anyone who chose to prey upon them. And Somewhere in the depths of space, criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for decades were beginning to realize that the rules had changed. The apex predators had arrived, and they were not interested in negotiation.